Hello YouTube, going to go ahead and start a little video series here, a series of probably 15 to 20 minute videos on the assembly of the Hultz Farmertec 372 XP clone. So I'm going to put this all together. Not sure how many parts it'll take, but kind of go through it step by step. When I did my first one, there's no real good instructions, and if you've not done a 372 before, knowing what nut goes where and what bolt goes where could be a bit of a chore. So we'll see if we can't put this together and make it a little easier on some guys. I'm by no means an expert on these, but hopefully you ought to be able to get yours together and running based on this series. So stay with me here, we'll get her going. How's it going this evening, TikTok? I'm going to start working on putting together the 372 Farmertec Hultz Pharma clone saw. Just straighten things up a little bit. I've got first thing I like to put in these is the bar studs, because they're a whole lot easier to drive in from inside the fuel tank before you put the case halves together. You can drive them in at room temperature, but life just goes a lot easier if you put them in the freezer for a little bit. They get just a tiny bit smaller because there's no gasket or sealant on these. They're just a interference fit. So I'm going to pause you for a second and go grab those out of the freezer. We'll drive those home. Just like to take a socket here. You got to be careful to make sure you get these things kind of set square to the world when you go driving them in. Otherwise, you can double nut on them and get them twisted into place if a guy has to. But if you can avoid that from the outset, you're in better shape. And there, you can see we got it off just a little bit. That's easy enough to fix if you do that. Just take your 2 bar nuts, double nut it on there. Your bar nuts. Some guys use the bar nuts to draw these in, and that works fine too. Get yourself a 13 millimeter wrench or 2. Crank these 2 bar nuts down together onto one another. And once you got that done, you can use the bar nut to realign just a little bit. Get everything squared back up to the world. And then once you get to there, you just got to pay attention to which way you need it to turn. Cardboard work surface here is not helping the program any. Hopefully we're still in frame here. There you can hear, kind of look down in there, you'll see it's all the way down. Grab your other one and repeat that process. You can drive her straight home. saw one guy do this. He put the socket in the vise. Probably make it a little bit easier. But right now I've got a spool out of a hydraulic valve in the vise. Sound change when they make it all the way home. Kind of look at them and see they'll be even. So there's your bar studs installed. I want to give that one more crack here. That sounds more better. So there you can see they're in. Didn't hurt it any at all doing that. Another thing a guy likes to do at this point, although you don't have to, is to go ahead and put the pickup tube for the bar oil on. You'll find this in a bag with a bunch of other rubber stuff. And then the suction screen for the bar oil is in a most obscure place in the same bag as the spark plug. So you can go ahead and push this guy in. You can put these in after the saw is assembled. They are serviceable, replaceable. I just find it to be a lot easier to fish it through when I got good access, because it goes in basically behind the clutch assembly. Metal in first, drops right in, and then you get good access to it. You can kind of push and pull it home without too much heartburn there. Just make sure that it's all the way in, and you just kind of tuck it off to the side there and set down in there, be out of your way. So at this point, I like to use the ultra gray. We're going to go ahead and put some ultra gray on. Some guys will say don't use a base gasket. I'm going to go ahead and put it on there just with these Chinese cases in the event that they're not perfect. Sorry, not base gasket, case gasket. But I'm going to go ahead and use the case gasket on this. That'll help out with any imperfections in the old case halves themselves. So you don't have to get real carried away with this stuff, especially if you're putting the gasket on it. And this stuff's probably colder than all get out, so I like to try to avoid getting overzealous with this, such that you wind up with it down inside the case. But you certainly don't want to have any air leaks in this area. Hopefully I got that in frame. This will be the first YouTube video I've made that wasn't some spur of the moment thing of me and some buddies doing questionably dumb stuff, admittedly. So you'll have to bear with me on the editing here for this program. You don't have to get real carried away here. So just make sure you got a good bead of coverage. If it squishes to the outside, go ahead and get around the holes a little bit. I don't like to get too much up on this dowel pin here. On these cases, you'll notice that up near the cylinder, there's a hollow dowel rod that has a bolt that goes through it, whereas the other dowel rod does not have a bolt that goes through it. Then you want to make sure you get around your bar oil tank as well. And I like to go on the inboard side and the outboard side, the bolt holes. The guy probably needs some better light here. I think I'm making a bit of a shadow on this program. Like I said, you don't need a ton, just a little skim coat. Now I do have right now, while I'm doing this, the crankshaft itself is in the freezer of my beer fridge here, so we'll let that just keep chilling out. I put it in a while ago. At the same time I put them bars, or the bar studs in, maybe half hour, 45 minutes or so before I started this project. That looks pretty good on that one. Do the same to the other half, since we're putting the gasket between them. Stuff's flowing a little better here now all of a sudden. So, last thing you want to do is have a leak on this program. Otherwise you'll be taking all this back apart. She won't run right with a leak in the case halves. Won't get any impulse, won't lube, won't pull fuel, have lean burn. Doesn't make for much of a different run condition versus having a bad crank seal. Make sure you get that case sealed up. Get all around the stud mounts and the dowel pins. We got that part there. I did this the way I don't necessarily like to. I like to have the both dowel pins in the same half of the case, and then you can use that half of the case for holding the case gasket in place. Just gonna seat that guy down in there. Some guys use a torch. Some guys will pull them in. I found cheapo Harbor Freight heat gun. Don't get carried away with them. Put just a little bit of heat into this bearing right here. It'll swell it, expand it just enough. Kind of go over to the other one, get it as well. You don't have to get crazy with this. Just barely moving that metal. When it's too hot to touch, it's about right. I'll walk over to the freezer. Grab the crankshaft out of the freezer. Make sure we got this program headed the right direction here. You stay in your home there. You want to make sure you've got the connecting rod up into the hole. And that'll drop right in. No beating, no banging, no nothing. Right around here, the other half of the case. Slip it right over. This side you want to be a little bit careful with. Everything's going the right direction. Something a little bit crooked here, and a string from my hoodie down in the works. Take little bit of case bolt action just to hold everything lined up a touch better. Probably should have put just a little bit more heat on that case half, and that would have fell right on. They usually do, but I didn't quite get her warm enough this time, I guess. But it feels like it'll go pretty easy here. We don't have to get too carried away on it. There we go. Tiny little bit, doesn't need much. Just go even with it if you're using the bolts to get her the rest of the way home. The guy doesn't want to get the case cockeyed. You wouldn't, some guys I've seen do that with everything at the same temperature. That seems like to me that'd put a fair amount of load on the bearing cage, using the outer race to pull the inner on, but folks get away with it. Something falling over on the workbench over there. Just run these. There's 6 case bolts. Snug everything up and then come back in and finish on them later here. Don't want to wait too long to do that, but with the Farmertec's Ultra Gray in there. This is the second one of these I've done. So these case bolts, there's 6 of them in the package. I believe that's the only package that has precisely 6 long bolts in it. So here we are. Case halves are together. Like I said, when you're going to pull those, you want to make sure you got the rod up where it belongs. So once you got it together, I like to stick a blue shop rag in here, and then you're left with these little tabs of case gaskets sticking up right where you don't need them, where your base gasket's going to go, or as is probably going to be the case here, where your Ultra Gray goes. We likely won't be running a base gasket on this saw. A lot of guys use a razor blade. I found a good sharp pocket knife works just as well as a razor blade. I put that blue shop towel in there so I avoid getting a situation where I've got a whole piece of case gasket drop down inside the case that you're sitting there trying to fish out. Like I said, if you keep a nice sharp pocket knife, that'll come right off of there, no problems. You don't have any excess stuff to worry about making a leak on your base gasket. So now you can see real quickly, shave those up. No more case gasket material sticking up in there. That's what we want. Well, that'll be about all for this video. Stay tuned for part 2 coming up. We'll get some more coming out shortly on this.